Fantastic. So again, a very, very warm welcome to everybody that's joined us today. My name's Lucy Parr. I'm the Managing Director of First Intuition up here in Yorkshire, so across the Leeds and the Sheffield offices. And I'm joined in hosting the session today by my colleague David Malthouse, who is Director down in our Chelmsford office down in Essex. So many of you will have potentially attended the FIT Forum that was hosted by Gareth last week, and that think tank back on the 8th of September was looking at attraction of qualified staff, and Gareth put a poll up at the start of that session, and one of the things that came out of that poll was that over 40% of people had said they were having trouble in terms of retention of their experienced staff, and a slightly smaller percentage talked about retention of managers. Now, having spoken to a number of the firms that I work with up here in Yorkshire and my professional network, we've realised that this is quite a topical issue at the moment, and many firms are struggling with this issue of retention of their key employees. So we felt that this would be an excellent subject in terms of this particular session, and we've got a fantastic panel who I will introduce you to shortly, who are going to share their experiences, some useful insights, some skills, techniques that maybe all of us as leaders will be able to take back to the workplace and use and share amongst our teams. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague David, and he's going to talk a little bit about leadership and management at First Intuition.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Really, I should be here talking to you about the second year of our leadership program, because we have developed a set of leadership courses and qualifications that we were due to launch roughly 18 months ago, but lots of things kind of got in the way of actually a physical launch, and it's something that's been a little bit frustrating to me that we haven't been able to do it. But obviously, you know, global pandemics come along and kind of knock us off our stride. Now, I'd had lots of conversations over the past 10 years amongst the clients that I work with across Essex, and there are two frustrations that a lot of them have with their qualified staff. And the first is, as Lucy said, around retention. So we have in Essex, we're very, very close to London. Lots of qualified staff tend to gravitate there because they feel that's where they need to go for their career. And when I've spoken to some of those clients, they've said, but there are opportunities here. There are real opportunities where they can be managers, they can be partners, but there isn't a pathway to get there. There isn't a pathway to be able to give those staff the skills that they need to be able to go forwards in their career. So they feel that they need to go. So there was kind of a gap in that from going from being qualified to actually leading, managing a team. And then the flip side of it was, we had lots of accountants that didn't make that move, but there was always a complaint that they're really good at their job, they're really good technically, but they don't know how to make the next step. So we've got the people that are ambitious moving away because they don't feel there's infrastructure for them to succeed internally, and the people that maybe need those skills given to them a bit of confidence being built, not being able to do it because, again, there wasn't anything in place for them. So the leadership courses that we developed, we put together, were very much with that in mind. So we're looking at a level 5 qualification, which is supported by the CIMA. And there's also a level 3 qualification, probably for people that have kind of finished the bookkeeping AAT type qualifications. But then, as Lucy said, we had the results from our FIT Forum the other week, and what we've seen over the last year is lots of our clients telling us that when we get back to some kind of normality, and we're getting people returning to the workplace, and some businesses are seeing enormous growth right now, in order to actually manage that, they're going to need to have people that are capable of managing their teams and driving the business forwards. So Lucy and I in Leeds and in Essex, we are running our first set of management courses. It will be for the level 5, which is slightly, I would say, a kind of good level for anyone that is, say, a qualified member of staff. We will be starting on week commencing the 11th of October. We are inviting all of our clients to come and investigate what we do. It's something that we're going to be offering to any of our clients, anyone that's been with us on our journey over the past years, is going to be able to attend one of those courses free of charge. We are kind of capping it at the moment to a maximum of 2 people from a single firm, just because there are limits to the number of people we could fit into a classroom. So what we're going to look at today is really a taster of the kind of things that we'll be working through on one of those days. So that's all I wanted to say. I'm not going to kind of go on all afternoon about the courses we're running, because we've got some amazing guests that have got some really, really great value to give us. So I'm going to hand back to Lucy to introduce our first guest.
Thank you very much. So hopefully you can see on the screen there a little bit of an overview about the great panel that we have to speak to you today. So I'm not going to go through each of them individually. You'll be able to have a brief read of who we've got here. So each of these people have agreed to give up their time today. We're very grateful of that, and all coming at a slightly different angle in terms of the leadership and the management skills that we're looking at. So as Dave's just introduced to you our leadership and management courses at First Intuition, we're running those in partnership in conjunction with the CMI, the Chartered Management Institute, and we're absolutely thrilled to have with us Caroline Connery from the CMI today. And so Caroline's going to kick us off. You know, ultimately we want to explore different techniques, considerations, think about that development and motivation of our staff, so that ultimately that helps with that problem that we're facing at the minute, that issue of retention. So I'm going to hand over first to Caroline. I will take away this slide so we're not distracted from that, and that we can hear from Caroline. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Interestingly, I was absolutely focused on making sure that I did in fact unmute myself. When I was away on holiday last week, I actually saw someone wearing a t-shirt that said "you're on mute," which has been perhaps one of the most phrases that people have heard over the last 18 to 24 months. I certainly know that internal meetings we say it a lot, and in external meetings we say it a lot. So thanks guys for letting me come here today and talk to everyone. I obviously work for the Chartered Management Institute. The reason we exist as an organisation, and we are a charitable organisation, our absolute mission in life is to improve managers and leaders for all organisations. And I think never has that been more important actually than for the last 18 months and for the next 18 months and probably beyond. So I think firstly to say that I think CMI did marvellously when we went into lockdown. We were ahead of the curve as an organisation. We actually started working from home 3 or 4 weeks before lockdown came. We put our offices into sort of mothballs, still to be looked after, but actually the encouragement was to keep people safe. One of the other things that we did, and I think did really well, is made a point of still reaching out to everyone who was a partner of ours, whether those people were delivering, whether they were perhaps struggling, or whether indeed, bizarrely, people delivered apprenticeships, and because people were furloughed and had lots and lots of time to write their assignments, decided that what they would do is write their assignments, and suddenly our marking numbers went up hugely. So it was a real mixed bag really, but I think the thing we did and did well was look after our own staff, but also to reach out to our partners. We also developed new products, which I'll talk you through a little bit later on, but we also improved hugely our online learning platform, Management Direct, which is full of over 2,500 pieces of information, either by video, by leaflet, things to read, things to interact with. But the realization was that we had to try and support our partners to be able to continue to deliver, but do that remotely. And by putting a lot of investment in terms of money and infrastructure and new staffing, we managed to do that and roll that out. But I think one of the things we did really a lot was actually listen to people who specifically came to us with problems. So I will give this example. We had a company where a young chap had been just promoted. So he would probably sit at around a level 3 team leader, but on kind of day 5 of his new promotion, he was told that actually he needed to put everyone he'd gone to the pub with the previous week onto furlough without the knowledge as to whether they were ever going to come back to a job. So he actually used our Management Direct platform to go through our having difficult conversations section, role played that with his manager, sat down and then had that incredibly difficult conversation with those group of people. And whilst that was quite daunting for him, the feedback he gave to us was that once he'd had the first meeting, having had the support and knowing what a good conversation looked like and what a bad conversation looked like, he had the confidence to be able to do that. And that, you know, we've got many examples of how that's been worked through the pandemic. We also produced a number of new programs, which are bite-sized programs. They're 90 minutes, they're completely online, and they deal with the things that actually managers returning to work now, or managers who suddenly had to look after a team of people who they didn't see physically for months and months on end. It was to help them to actually get through that kind of crisis and still continue to have business as usual. And those cover things like managing in a digital age, managing teams remotely, equality, diversity and inclusion. And actually part of the managing teams remotely is something that we, I think as an organisation, did incredibly well. We recruited 5 mental health first aiders, and part and parcel of the programme for managing people remotely is about people being given triggers and information about how they should be able to look at the thing that someone never tells you, which is actually they're struggling. But because you can't really see them, you don't see their body language, that your staff could be struggling, but they just don't feel that they can share that information with you. Our mental health first aiders that work for us at CMI are not there as doctors or practitioners, but what they do is they signpost people and they encourage people to get the help that they'll need. And all that became part and parcel of that managing remote team module. And it allowed managers to be able to take a step back and maybe realise, actually, what's this person going through? In addition to that, as part of our management director membership package, we also have an agreement with a company called CIMA, and CIMA look after mental and physical well-being. So anybody who's a member who's doing a qualification with us and will get membership as part of that, they have access to CIMA, and that will give them access to someone who's not at work, but someone who will either signpost them or will actually provide them a contact to a physical health practitioner or a mental health practitioner. So I think, in short, for my rambling, and I'm conscious that we don't have lots of time here, but I think in short for us, it was about listening to what our partners were telling us. And it was about equipping the managers for then, now, and I think very much in the future, to be able to successfully manage the teams in what I think is a very different way to the way they've done previously. So I think I've hopefully not gone over my 5 to 10 minutes there.
Thank you, Carolyn. No, absolutely on time. That's great. Thank you. And yeah, I think we've all identified, haven't we, that we're having to change our style and have different considerations that we previously had. I know this is something that Helen and Kay are going to touch on later on in the session, and equally the mental health side of things, that mental health first aid. We've very much invested in that within First Intuition as well. I've got a number of my team in the Leeds office who are all being trained on that side of things, whether they be managers or not, but certainly as managers being able to identify that and then know what to do with that is really important. So thank you, Carolyn. We will be back to speak to you with a couple of questions later on. So we'll move on to our second speaker, which is Elena. And Elena's going to look at things more from an HR perspective and talk to you for a few minutes on her experiences of working for a global business, and also touching on things to do with stress management, which I think follows on very nicely from the mental health things that Carolyn's just spoken about. So I'll hand over to you, Elena. Thank you.
Hey, hello. Thank you, Lucy. My name is Elena Kennedy. My background is that I've been working as head of HR for a leading foreign exchange business since 2012. Our headquarters were in Mexico. The offices I managed from a HR perspective were based in the UK, the Netherlands, Spain, Luxembourg, Singapore, and Canada. And I started my career in 2009. However, this year I've supported the business through many years of growth, and the pandemic I've decided to leave to focus on stress management and to help managers managing well-being. I found that one of the key areas where I enjoyed the most was supporting all the employees with their well-being, their mental health, and to work with them to enable them to feel valued as a workforce. Being a global company as well, we were lucky to learn from other offices at different points of lockdowns for each country. That really helps for the managers and the leaders, how they manage the pandemic, how their staff are feeling. The Netherlands, for example, seemed a lot more relaxed than the other offices. and then how they managed the return to work, how important the coffee was when they returned to the office. That was for every office, by the way. One of the things I think worked well to manage the workforce remotely was all the leaders pulling together to ensure daily informal and formal meetings. So communicate all the time with how the staff were feeling, how they were coping, what equipment did they need. So they were able to do their job working from home. And importantly, I found a new bond of trust was formed, and trust is vital for any culture. I think the most businesses were forced into a situation of trusting their staff working from home during the crisis. The majority didn't fail to impress us, I have to say. Yeah, so with the informal catch-ups, they were organised in the same way. And what we would say is that what was a coffee catch-up or directly just over the phone, meetings were set to about 30 minutes. And I felt they were more connected since the pandemic, as 30 minutes would go quite quickly, we would overrun, and then I'd look at my notes on this informal meeting, my to-do list, and the topics that I had to deal with was pushing up to my priority list. So those informal catch-ups were really important. And I also felt the managers were working hard, making more of an effort during this time, so everyone was pulling together and they cared. So working in an extremely fast-paced environment, employees can sometimes be promoted into a management role without the skill set to suddenly manage a team. They're sometimes great at the job, but would need a lot of hand-holding through some of the HR issues. And it's our role as HR to support these managers and provide the right training to empower them and to make their teams, manage their teams effectively. And one of the things I would feel important as a leader or manager is having empathy towards your staff. So you can understand what and how they're feeling. Your staff should feel relaxed and comfortable to communicate to you if something isn't clear to them or something else is going on in their personal lives. And if you think, what is the most asked question in the world? How are you? We should say it and mean it. If, for example, an employee coming early, they're clearly showing signs of stress, spilling their tea over the paperwork, snapping at the colleagues, and I go, how are you? They say, fine. I quickly walk away because I don't want to know what's going on. I just want that report done, give it to me. That's not good management. So it's our role as a leader to genuinely care, to show empathy, not sympathy, but also to be authentic about it. We all know if someone generally wants to know, how are you, and actually help if you're not fine. If I now ask again, how are you? Fine. I lean in. How are you really? There's often a silence, meaning they're not okay. So you read that with your employees, because they may be thinking, I'm scared because I've made a mistake on payroll. I forgot to send a new starter contract, or it could be the lease on my flat's gone. I've got nowhere to live. I've got a problem with my boiler at home. Or one of my family members has passed away. We never know what's going on in someone's personal life. I'm not saying we need to know everything about our staff's private lives, but we should know when things are not going okay, so you can manage your department or team effectively, efficiently, to ensure the business is not affected and the employees are cared for. So I would say, Joe, Bob over there, finish the report and go, you go home and fix that boiler. You know, how do they feel now? You've taken that time out to care for them. And as a manager, it's important to put yourself in your staff's shoes and provide emotional support. It allows the staff to feel safe with their failures and not feel they're being blamed for them, and encourages management to understand the causes of poor performance. So empathy, not sympathy. And on that side, the term soft skills dramatically undersells how powerful these human skills are for success, both for individuals and companies. As usual, soft skills cannot be measured by some companies in a world where everything needs to be quantified, everything. So soft skills are naturally not in the forefront. I'm just going to take a sip of water. So especially now where businesses are under scrutiny internally, and how you're dealing with your employees' well-being, mental health. If your organisation is not perceived as treating the staff well, you will be under scrutiny. Many of the leaders in my previous role, pre-pandemic, sat on the office floor and the other staff amongst everybody. You wouldn't know, looking at the floor, who's a director, who's an MD, who's the junior salesperson. They wanted to be on the floor, seeing and feeling what the staff were going through on a daily basis. They could physically see the stress of the staff, what they were going through. So if you remember that 55% of communication is through your body language, which is quite difficult to read sometimes over the Zoom calls. Yeah. So when they're on the floor, many issues could be resolved quickly, informally, and it actually avoided a lot of issues arising in the first place. And so our culture is how we treat each other. Culture is strengthened by the key idea that people are essential to your business. It's how we treat people as a business. We should be clear on our purpose and the responsibility to our stakeholders. So everyone stands to benefit. We embrace the value of the diversity of thoughts, and businesses should let all staff feel that they belong. Their contribution matters, no matter what their background, identity, or circumstances. So organisations must ensure their people management approaches don't put any group at disadvantage. So the leaders have a key role to play in role modelling, inclusion and diversity, I feel. And if you want to attract new talent, research shows that the psychological contract, which is not the physical written form, that people want to work with good employment practices so they feel valued. So rewards, that should be fair across the board. You know, for example, if one team over there, they're going to get free lunches, you've been working hard, and the other team going, I've been working hard too, I want some free lunch. You know, that can, create a bad atmosphere or split the culture and lead to bigger issues. So as Lucy mentioned, I've been working with the Stress Management Society now, and it's been absolutely amazing for me. It's helped me with one of my fears, speaking to an audience, whether it be management meetings, Zoom calls, facilitating workshops on leadership. One of the things that we teach on managers managing wellbeing is the 7 E's framework. I give you one of the E's in the framework that I consider to be extremely important as a leader, which is exemplify. We all know what exemplify means. It's the standards and values you wish to embed in the organisation. So like be the change, follow by example. So you're setting the standards as a leader among staff to prevent do as I say, not as I do culture. This idea can take the staff back to their childhood of having double standards among them and their parents. So it run the risk of creating a parent and child dynamic. That makes sense. So some examples of exemplifying yourself as a leader would be take lunch, a 20-minute break from your desk. You know, it's where I was working in a city, it's very much you eat and sleep and breathe at your desk. So you need to show your staff that you're taking that 20-minute break, and they should be doing that as well. Or don't contact your team when they're on holidays. And also speaking to staff with the respect and tone that you expect others to speak to you in. As a manager or leader, it's really important you manage your staff's well-being and understanding stress management, which is Carolyn was talking about. And so to avoid the burnout or the forms of stress that staff are faced with today. So if you do so, you'll see more of a positive, engaging team who are more willing to give you discretionary effort in the business. Let them know what support your business provides. If you've got a healthcare provider that does mental first aiders, that would be brilliant. So I'm not sure what your companies provide, but let them know and be aware that that's there for them. So I think it's time to increase our mental, emotional, spiritual capacity to cope with the challenges we're currently facing. So it's really important with stress management for managers to understand how to deal with that. And I hope I haven't gone over my time as well, Lucy.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lena. There were so many things that I was sort of scribbling down and nodding and agreeing with, and I saw other people nodding there. Just, I mean, that absolute how are you question. And it's something that I've certainly stopped and made sure that if somebody asks me that I don't equally just say, I'm fine, or, you know, I'm busy kind of thing, and actually stop and have that conversation. So that was really important, those informal catch-ups, that empathy side of things, loads of things that you've mentioned there, that body language I've noticed from being back in the office more now, just being able to pick up and I can see how people are feeling or coping or dealing with their day. So some really, really interesting things there. Thank you so much.
I just like taking a break as well. I mean, I think that it's so important because it's so easy for me. I could work 12 hours straight because I've got so many things on my plate. But if you do that and everyone sees you doing it, it almost becomes the norm. And I know that it's not healthy and I shouldn't be doing it. but I shouldn't be setting an example to the rest of my team. So, you know, when I'm in the office, I'm always, you know, I always try and make sure I take lunch break, take breaks in the afternoon, you know, spend some time, you know, with the rest of the team to show them that, you know, they don't need to be in front of their screen, you know, for 12 hours a day.
You have to be strict with your own boundaries as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Just a reminder, if anybody's got comments, chat or questions, please do feel free to pop those in the chat box. We've got other members of the FI team, Andy and Shelley are here, and Crystal as well, who will keep track of what's going on in the chat box. What's Ian's actually popped in there, a great quote that I saw: "The standard you walk past is the standard you set." Nice quote that, Ian. Thank you very much. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Helen and Kay. I believe you've got some bits and pieces to pop on screen as well. So I'll hand over to the two of you for some further information and insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thanks very much, Lucy. And I've passed the first test of unmuting myself, so off to a good start. So my name's Kay Thompson-Barker, and I'm Director of Sealight Development, which is a people and organisation development consultancy. We specialise in leadership development. And so what I'd like to do today is start off with reflecting upon what's happened since March 2020. And to do that, to help us to really get a better understanding of what's going on in the workplace right now, how we can attract the best people and how we can keep hold of those best people. And for me, it's very much about the shift in expectations, the shift in employers' expectations, what they want from us as leaders and what they want from us as employers. So if we reflect back, and you know, sorry to bring old wounds to the surface, and some of this is still very, very relevant to us. But of course, you know, we've been through the pandemic, but not just the pandemic during the last 18 months. We've been through Black Lives Matter. We had the US presidential elections. We finally managed to complete Brexit after many, many years of debates about the pros and cons of Brexit. These things, as we've gone through these things, we've observed really significant shifts in values at global, national, community and personal levels. You know, with the pandemic, we saw that really big shift, political shift in prioritising UK health and welfare over our economy. We saw a huge social shift as the global community protested against racial injustice, calling for systemic political, economic and social change. And in a business context, this has led to a call for what we often hear being called compassionate leadership. You know, we've heard from Elena and others about the importance of employee health being both physical and mental health, and safety being a priority, inclusion and flexibility, absolute priorities for people. And to understand this as leaders, what I really believe is that we need to step into shoes that don't fit. And if we do that and think about perhaps the people who we lead, and think about how just a COVID pandemic has perhaps deeply impacted many aspects of their lives and work, and different for each of them individually, whether for some it's been about sheltering from the virus, for some it may be serious illness, sudden and very traumatic bereavement. For others, it's about furlough and redundancies. On the other hand, many of us have experienced increased workloads. We've balanced homeschooling for children. Others have experienced social isolation and loneliness, being separated from loved ones. And again, for others, it's about working at home for the very first time and trying to make that work in potentially quite crowded homes, fighting for space and broadband. And during this time, people have really experienced a myriad of emotions, including all of us, I'm sure. And there's still a range of issues that we've got to face. You know, there's lots of very real anxiety out there about returning to work, about commuting to work. There's fears over the financial impact of people, and certainly financial well-being is something that is becoming an increasing crisis for many people. There's still so many uncertainties about how we navigate this new normal, not to mention continued concerns about exposure to new variants. And so it's not surprising then that this has had a really big impact on people, and it's led us all to reevaluate what's important. I'm sure that you've each experienced that. Your colleagues and your teams will have experienced that, as will your clients and your stakeholders. And the experience is different for everyone, of course, so it's important to not to make assumptions, but there are a few things that are becoming very, very clear. Firstly, the risk of mental health certainly increased. The pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing problems and also caused many problems for those who hadn't experienced them before. And if you look at the data from the ONS, from health charities like Mind, you'll see the really significant increase in those conditions arising. We know also that general health and well-being has been affected. For example, musculoskeletal conditions resulting from uncomfortable work conditions at home. And people are dealing with those continued changes to their working situation. Lots of uncertainty around at the moment about how hybrid working models will work. Perhaps people who've not had to arrange childcare over the last 12 months now have that problem of what do they do if they have to return to the office permanently. Others absolutely desperate to get back into the workplace to escape the people they're surrounded by day in, day out. And of course, going back to the Black Lives Matter example, inequality, unfairness and injustice has been really highlighted during this period. And that's changed people's expectations of their employer. People are feeling more confident in speaking out for what they believe in. And so from a leadership perspective then, this is really fundamental to us. The principles and the values that have underpinned our purpose as individuals and the priorities that those drive have changed. So very briefly today, I want to focus on 3 key areas that we can focus on as leaders. Firstly, purpose and values. Secondly, how we help people fulfill their potential. And thirdly, really enabling people to stay well-being. And many of the points that Elena made actually really very relevant there. So let's start with focusing then on purpose and values. I was looking at some research by the Institute of Leadership and Management that they conducted over the last few months. And they found that 70% of the personal values that are held by employees are not those that are championed by their employer. So there's a disconnect between the things that are really important to individuals and the values that firms, businesses, organisations communicate as their organisational values, the things that they publish to say, here's what we're about, this is what's important to us. Men, on average, tend to have 50% of their core values in common with the top 10 organisational values, but for women, it's only 30%. And the millennials and Generation Z are generally not even involved in value setting. Those younger people, those below 35, generally not even being involved in those discussions. So again, a big disconnect between the values that we promote and publish as an organisation, disconnected with the things that are really important to the individuals, the employees. And what we tend to find, and it's not surprising, of course, that organisational values tend to focus more on functional and outcome-driven measures such as accountability, quality, teamwork. Whereas, of course, workers place more value on human aspects, things like honesty, doing the right thing, and making a difference. And making a difference, actually, is a really important value in the context of what we talked about, that people have a need for a greater sense of purpose. When they get out of bed and go to work, whether that's into the next room or it's a commute into town, they want to go and make a difference. And make a difference is in the top 10 values held by employees across all sectors. It's the only value that is held by employees across all sectors. But it's only in the top 10 of organisation values in the charitable sector, only in the charitable sector, not in the public sector. not in the private sector. Making a difference. So Glassdoor, you'll have heard of Glassdoor, a website where people can leave reviews about their organisations, and lots of job seekers gone there to have a look at, find out, research about organisations before they join. Their research showed that job seekers are increasingly looking for more meaningful workplace experience. They're certainly researching and looking for alignment with their values. Their research suggests that 69% of people would not apply to a company unless its values aligned with their personal values. So there's certainly a case here for us to humanise our values. But of course, you know, going beyond recruitment stage, there's new ways of working taking shape, and expectations of leadership have changed. So it's thinking about how we keep hold of those people at the same time. And I just really wanted to very briefly share a few slides with you, which come from a website called the Engage for Success. It's a movement, government-sponsored movement, based 10 years of research into successful engagement practice. And they've come up with these 4 pillars of engagement. First being strategic narrative, aligning what someone's doing to the purpose of your organisation, giving that strong narrative about what your business is all about. Second one, employee voice, giving people that opportunity to contribute, to be heard, to share what's important to them, to share their ideas, to challenge views. The third one is about engaging managers, focusing on our people, giving them scope, empowering them, coaching and stretching them. And the fourth one is all about organisational integrity. Exactly as Elena was saying just now, this, you know, walking the talk, living up to your values, keeping the promises that you make, and if you can't, explaining why not. So I'd really encourage you to have a look at that website. It's www.engageforsuccess.org.uk. So the second area I just really wanted to touch on then was in relation to enabling people to fulfill their potential. I mentioned 3 key areas, kind of values and purpose, fulfilling potential and well-being. And I'm not going to go into any detail at this point on well-being, because I think Elena's covered that off really, really well. So I just want to move on to this need to provide the opportunity for people to really fulfill their potential. And it links so strongly into that purpose, because people will give their best to you if they believe in your purpose and they are making that difference. So providing people with the opportunity to feel a part of things, giving them work that really matters. If people feel as though they're a really indispensable part of your organisation, your firm, then they're going to really effectively, you can really solidify their loyalty, their motivation, and boost their morale. And that drives their performance. Without doubt, that drives performance. So if we consider personal development, which of course it is where Helen and I focus so strongly with finance professionals, personal development, we know, has never been more important to people, because that is a tool that empowers them to fulfill their potential. And in these last 2 years, where we've really learned the importance of being so resilient in an uncertain world, people now value that opportunity to learn new skills that are going to unlock their potential to survive into the future. So Helen, I'm going to hand over to you so you can tell us more really about the skills a finance professional needs to future-proof their career in finance.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Kate. So yeah, this is a very exciting time to be a finance professional. In the finance world today, there are so many catalysts for change, and we've been talking about some here today, predominantly thinking about COVID, the impact that's had on us, home working, adjusting, we're auditing remotely, we're preparing financial statements remotely, we're holding finance team meetings remotely. But undoubtedly, another huge driver for change is technology. And technology is already changing the roles that we play as finance professionals. We're already spending less time on repetitive processes, we're spending less time on compliance work, and that allows us to spend more time working with data or on more advisory services, depending on what role you're in. Now, those common accounting tasks are not going anywhere, thank goodness. They're still there, they're still important, but it's likely that accountants won't be needed to do them all. And we hear a lot about this, and I'm not going into the technology route too far today. I just want to think about it from the point of view of what skills do we need to remain relevant, and what do we need to be offering our staff so that they can see that we're moving forward and that they're being developed within our organisation. Because whether we like it or not, automation and artificial intelligence are going to increasingly take over those basic tasks. So again, depending on where you're working, it'd be lovely to hear in chat actually what your experiences are. But already I see with my clients that software is increasingly taking over some of the accounting work, even things like audit testing, compliance, bookkeeping. Now, the software is not without issue, but they're continually developing and improving. And the relevance of that is that as accountants, as leaders, we need to position ourselves, our organisation and our teams with the skills to deliver those higher value services. Now, quite naturally, automation creates some fear about the impact on jobs. Now, these concerns, these anxieties are legitimate, but all of the research carried out by ACCA, ICAEW, CIMA, all of the institutes suggests that it also creates opportunities for us as finance professionals to take on those more interesting roles, so we can spend time on the higher value tasks, so we can spend time on the data analysis, on strategy, what I would think of as the fun stuff. And it allows us to maximize the human skills that can't be automated, things like leadership, as we've been talking about, empathy that we've been talking about, creativity and judgment. A computer can't do that. Now, the purpose of my slot here is to think about some of the skills that are necessary to enable us to take advantage of the opportunities of the changes within our profession and the changes of increased automation and that changing environment. And everything I've read and all the clients I speak to highlights that a primary factor for us as finance professionals, for us as leaders, for us as team leaders, is our attitude. We need to be open-minded and we need to be curious. We need to recruit people who are open-minded and curious. And we need to be prepared to experiment. We need to accept that things will fail, that things will go wrong. And we need to be open as accountants to reskilling where necessary, because we need to show our teams that we are looking forward. And in reality, given the pace of the change in business and technology, the right mindset and the attitude is likely to be just as important as reskilling. So what are the skills that we need as future finance professionals? I just want to show you this very, very quickly. There's a model that I would just like to show you that was prepared by CIMA. Just let me alter the size of that so you can see it. And what CIMA says the future role of the accountant is. Now, everything we do as finance professionals is underpinned by our integrity, our ethics and our professionalism, and that's not going anywhere. Obviously, we're going to need to increase our digital skills. Digital technology, data analytics are obvious areas where we need more skills, but we don't all need to be the expert, but we need to have that openness. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity for reverse mentoring, because those junior people in the organisation, this will be where they can excel, and you can let them lead and let them drive the direction and the research within your organisation. Which audit software is best for us? Which technology is going to help our finance department? Where could AI be useful? And in this way, we create that collaborative business model. Now, reassuringly for techie geeks like me and Lucy and David, the technical skills are not going anywhere. We need strong technical skills, but these must be applied in the context of the business to generate relevant insight for business decision making. We need to collaborate across the organisation. We need to understand what information is needed from finance. We need to tailor our analysis and reporting to meet the organisation's informational needs. And this requires really strong people skills, as Elena referred to. Collaboration, communication, relationship building and influencing are all critical. And demonstrating these skills gives us as finance a mandate to move the perception of finance away from bean counter to the part of the business, the consultant that drives business performance. And this also gives us an opportunity to really step forward into those leadership roles. We can have the opportunity to demonstrate our leadership skills, and keeping an open mind allows us to be front and central in an organisation, not hidden away somewhere as part of the backroom reporting bean counting function. So loads of opportunity. I could talk to you about it for hours, but I know I can't because we're already running over. But so many things, so many opportunities for us and skills to develop, as Elena said, to really pull out those people skills, as Kay said, and bringing together our role in the future.
Thank you, Helen. That's really interesting. Just going to shift the order a little bit because Carolyn and Kay have both got other places to be at 1:30. And so, sorry, Luke, I'm going to make you wait just a little bit longer. And Luke's going to look at things more specifically from a finance practice perspective for us. But I'll just hand over to Dave so it can direct a question at Carolyn and Kay before they disappear.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Yeah, both you. If you have to rush off at the end, I don't get to say it. Thank you so much for your contributions. I thought they're absolutely brilliant. But I'm actually after a bit of advice personally with this question, and it's something that's cropped up when I spoke to a good number of clients over the past 18 months. There have been, I think, some real benefits to the way that some of us have worked. So I know. This morning, for instance, I was more efficient in the work that I did than I ever would have been in the past. I had about 5 client meetings, client phone calls, and if this would have been 18 months ago, I'd have been in the car for half of that time and I probably would have met 2 people. So I got far better usage of my time. I know lots of my team are the same as well. But I also recognise that there are lots of things that we miss through not being together in the office. And just because I'm efficient, it doesn't mean that my time can be really well used with my team and my team actually seeing me. So the balance that I'm trying to strike, and I'd be interested in finding out your ideas on this, is how do we kind of bring back some of those great things that we all miss from 18 months ago, whilst maintaining the benefits of the things that we've actually learned and gained over the last 18 months?
I'll just give you a really quick kind of example, because it's actually, interestingly, I'm having my first real live face-to-face meeting next week for 19 months. So yeah, I found myself plotting travel to and travel from in my diary, which is bizarre because I haven't done that for I don't know how long. And I think that is probably actually the key to it. So I have made myself fairly regimented in that I plan my diary very well. And it will have travel to and travel from time. But if I'm going to do a meeting, then I will make that probably a Tuesday and a Wednesday. And I will work Monday, Thursday, Friday from home. And that's kind of the suggestion that the team that work for me do the same, so that everyone feels comfortable doing it. And it's also been made very, very clear to people, we are not going back to, I travelled there, I got home at 9 o'clock at night and I'm expected to be at my desk at 9, because no, you're not. I stayed overnight because I was in Newcastle, but I'm still expected to be back on the road and in front of my computer at 9. No, you're not. So it actually feeds quite nicely into the whole conversation we've had. So while still doing the things we did and taking the advantage of that, we're actually looking at all the things we've discussed and all the new practices to still make that effective, but also take into account all of the other important things and the huge lessons I think we've learned over the last 18 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I absolutely agree with what Carolyn said. It's so important, and of course the purpose of your question, Dave, to retain the benefits that we've experienced from this new way of working, which none of us would have ever imagined would have happened without the pandemic, unfortunately. And the way I think about this at the moment is kind of with the concept of a triangle. I think there's three sides to this triangle, and one is flexibility, because having experienced new ways of working now, everyone has an expectation of more flexibility. And as managers, there's no way of hiding from that. The second side is inclusion, because in providing flexibility for every individual, we therefore need to be inclusive. And there comes the challenge, which is the third line of a triangle, which is efficiency. Because as managers, how do we make that work efficiently? If I've got a team of 10 people, all of whom have different working patterns, working different shifts, working different times and days in the office, at home, when do I book my meetings without expecting people to join when they shouldn't be working? How do we do the collaborative working? How do we get the social connections when everybody's available? The reality is it's incredibly challenging. But I think for me, therefore, going back to my little rant earlier about purpose, putting purpose at the centre of that triangle is a way in which you can get some alignment between all of those different expectations from people that enable people to see how they can contribute and how they can make it work. So what compromises people can make to make the model work for everyone. I think, the key things practically creating opportunities for social interaction. That's been missing for so many people. So finding those opportunities, ways that you can work collaboratively to solve problems and to build opportunities, continuing to make best use of tech for doing that. We know that can work really well. And on that topic of commute, which I absolutely love not having to do that commute up and down the East Coast Railway line. Don't miss that in the slightest. However, the one thing that we should be really, really careful of, that commute did provide people with that opportunity to switch off after work. Perhaps it's, or perhaps it's a time to do the calls, or perhaps it's listening to an audiobook, but it's that decompression time for many of us. And if we continue to work at home as our primary place of work, how do we make sure we get that decompression from a well-being perspective? That's really important.
I agree. I sometimes find myself wishing that I could actually, I actually had a drive to go somewhere, so I don't have to think about things. So I understand what you mean with that. We all, are grateful that we get the time back from the commute, but you're absolutely right. There are certain benefits that time where you get home and you're not thinking about work. But yeah, thanks for those.
Thank you, Kay and Carolyn. Really appreciate your input today. So we'll hand over to Luke now. He's been waiting patiently. Apologies, Luke. So Luke is a partner in a practice firm over in Hull, who we work with up here in Yorkshire. And so Luke's going to look at this from a perspective of having been led and being a leader, and thinking also about some of the new challenges that are facing us. So thank you, Luke.
Thanks, Lucy. Yes, as Lucy mentioned, I'm focusing today on retention. Going to talk through a few of my experiences of when I was a trainee, working through the practice, how I was led, how I was managed, what ultimately led to my retention within the firm, and then how I've used, the way that I was developed into the approach that we now take with all our staff. So I guess to start off, I joined Smells Goldie in 2009. I'd graduated from university with a master's degree. I didn't have any particular career goals other than that I knew I wanted to be involved in the running of a business, or work on a board level within a business. I didn't have any specifics in terms of industry sector, but the way I looked at achieving that goal, given a numerical background, was that I thought, a finance career is probably the right path. So I searched for accountancy practice graduate programs and ultimately joined Smells Goldie. At that point, my goal was solely to become a qualified chartered accountant. And I believe that's key when we're recruiting trainees at the moment. The vast majority of our trainees over the first 3 to 5 years of their career have no other goal other than solely, predominantly becoming qualified. And I think that's key, or the first key step to ultimately securing retention for the longer term, if we can understand that. Now, through my training, I was obviously supported by partners, by the managers that I worked with, through the training providers that the firm used. But ultimately for me, as long as the financial reward at the time was sufficient, that enabled me to have the work-life balance that I wanted, and I was making progress with my exams, I was happy ticking along. The key turning point was the point when I actually became exam qualified, and I had a meeting with our then staff partner. It was an open and honest conversation about the future, about what the future might entail if I still stayed with the firm, and ultimately gave me a chance to air my goals, my long-term career goals. And it was at that point that partnership was put on the table for myself. And I guess the key point here is that I know Kay mentioned about a mismatch between business values and personal values, and I want to talk about business goals and personal goals a lot here, but that was the point where my personal goals became aligned with the goals of the business. I could see a common connect between the two, and ultimately it gave me a path to get to my ultimate career goal, that I came into the profession wanting. So yeah, at that point it stopped me leaving for any other industry opportunity where we see a lot of finance professionals move out of accounting practice. It stopped me going to the Big Four for a pay rise, for want of a better word. But it wasn't just that conversation. That conversation happened, and then it was important that the development plan was put in place. So we had regular 6 monthly feedback and review meetings. I was given exposure to different types of work. I was allowed to work with different types of clients to keep me engaged. I was included in high-level meetings that perhaps others at my level weren't often open to. And I was given some softer skills development training. The professional qualification's great, and we all get technically upskilled, but it's perhaps lacking that softer skills side that you need as you progress to management and obviously within our profession partnership. Did it all go smoothly? Absolutely not. Did I think about leaving for other opportunities? Absolutely, and that's natural. But ultimately, those 6 monthly catch-up review meetings were what always brought it back to track. It was all about realigning the goals, making sure that we were on the right path, and ultimately giving a time frame for where we were going to be. I obviously now understand, coming into partnership, that retaining me and a couple of other new partners, for the long term, so that we would eventually become partners in the business, was key for the current partnership at that time, to ensure that they could retire and the firm could successfully continue. And yeah, ultimately I didn't appreciate it at the time, but the goals were aligned, and it led to me staying with the practice. So I guess if I flip that on its head now, and use, how do I use my experiences to impact on the way I lead, manage, and really it's all about that aligning of goals. So I appreciate the conversation that I had is not one that will be had with most newly qualified, but I still think that conversation is important. So at the point of qualification, or even just beforehand, I really think it's important to sit down with the trainees, with all members of staff, and understand what their goals and ambitions are, and see if we can align them with the business goals, to allow them to achieve their goals, working within the practice. And if we can, then we can manage their development, create a development plan for that individual, so that they're constantly working towards our goals, and obviously ultimately helping us as business owners achieve what we want to from our business. I believe taking this approach from an early stage ensures that as a business we drive forward as we intend to, but it helps us understand which individuals are likely to move on post-qualification, and then we're not investing time in those unnecessarily. It also helps us to identify which individuals are key to our firm's future success, and really work with them in the same way that the partners at the time worked with myself. And also it gives us an understanding of who has potential and for what roles. Everybody has a role to play within the business, and it's about getting the best out of them for that. And there is no one size fits all approach, but once we understand what motivates people, you know, understand their ambitions, understand their goals, then we can create the right environment for that person to achieve. I know it's been said a lot, you know, it's about the working environment. Is it the right fit for the individual? And I think if we can create that, and as well, if we can be proactive with working with them, you know, we can, if we reward and recognize the good qualities, the good work that they do, if we can catch them doing the right things and actually tell them, you know, that they've done that well, if we can incentivize them along the way and celebrate the small wins. It's not always about the big achievements. You know, if we can celebrate the small wins, then we're doing everything possible to ensure that, you know, we're going to retain the key staff, or retain the staff, you know, that we have, and also obviously ensuring that we have a happy and engaged workforce. So that brings me on to my next point, really, and it's something that we're seeing a lot as when we're looking at recruiting, both at trainee level and qualified onwards, is that the reward package is now not just pay. It's not pay driven. It's all about the overall package. Yes, pay is always a factor, but we're now seeing a lot of focus on what are the progression opportunities. Does that fit what the potential recruit wants? What's my work-life balance going to be like? How flexible is the working arrangement in terms of time? You know, working time, working from home, working in the office. What's the working environment like? What are the social environments like outside of work? How can I engage with my colleagues, not just at work, but, you know, in free time? What type of clients will I be working with? So they're just some of the questions that when we're interviewing potential candidates, that's what we find ourselves being asked, sorry. And ultimately, whilst we do run an interview in a traditional way, there is a lot more now where candidates are questioning us, and we're finding ourselves actually selling the practice, you know, selling ourselves to the candidates, because ultimately the pandemic and working from home has created a significant amount of opportunity for qualified candidates specifically to work in regions other than where they live. So just leading on to the pandemic, and I don't want to touch on it too much. I know it's been discussed already, but for office-based professionals, you know, such as ourselves, the pandemic brought with it working from home, which for the first time in many years for our profession was probably the biggest disruption to the way that we work that we've ever seen. And as I said, it brings with it significant risks, specifically with regard to retention. Sorry, excuse me. The retention, because there's now an opportunity, as I just mentioned, to work in other regions to which you live. But obviously that brings with it opportunities for future recruitment. And I think it's that flexible working that presents the biggest risk to our profession. And ultimately, as an employer, if we're not on board with the ability to work flexibly, or perhaps even ahead of the curve, then we risk, you know, losing key members of staff and not recruiting, or not being able to recruit others into the practice to keep it moving forward. I think it's early days. I think somebody mentioned it, you know, it's still settling down in terms of what is the ideal balance of flexible working. And I think time will tell, because I strongly believe that within practice, we have a strong training environment. You know, we are constantly recruiting, training individuals, and I think there's no getting away from the fact that the learning environment that the office presents is perhaps much better than the remote learning environment that we've had over the last 18 months. But then on the flip side of that, I can't ignore the fact that if there's a significant piece of technical work to be done, it's much easier to do that sat at home, interruption free. So getting the balance of that right, to me, is one of the biggest risks our profession faces, to ensure that we can continue to attract, you know, trainees and qualified recruits, but also retain the excellent workforce that we currently have. So thank you very much. I think that's covered on everything that I wanted to.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Luke. Yeah, seeing it from a slightly different perspective there in terms of the sort of practice environment, and interesting really, isn't it, that flexible working is something that a lot of us have in some ways actually benefited from, and we've seen some, you know, great positives come from it, but actually highlighting that it is also a risk to many organisations, many businesses, in terms of their ability to recruit and retain. So we do have to think about, actually there's risk and benefit associated with some of these things that we're now having to work with as a result of the recent sort of 15, 19, don't know how many months, lost track of years, months, can't count anymore. And I guess perhaps on that then, I can direct a question to Elena and Helen, if I can. This whole flexible working, this ability to work differently, how do we ensure that we're maintaining an element of culture, an element of team in terms of this new way that we're working? Have you got any sort of advice or comments with regards to that? Eleanor's muted.
You're muted. Sorry. Oh, okay. Well, I think employers really should be creating a safe environment for the staff to grow, and whether that's flexible working from home or in the office, so their needs are met, where they can thrive. Also, for talking about the leaders and managers being authentic, so having those open and honest conversations, make sure it's appropriate but direct, respectful, and showing that empathy side and the soft skills, which will help with the culture. And being fair across board. I feel that leaders are on all levels. So you could get someone quite junior come in, but they show leader qualities as well. So it really is having those open and honest conversations to include everyone's opinion on things, because they may have brilliant ideas that can contribute to the growth of the business, or help contribute to the team working effectively that the manager hasn't seen, because they're not amongst all the mess sometimes, because you're off doing all your other meetings or working from home. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think for me, it's probably too simplistic, but I think communication and talking to people and finding out, as we've discussed, about how they're doing, where they're at. But in terms of creating that culture within your team, actually, asking people, taking the opportunity maybe for more, we talked about shorter, more regular catch-ups, and what do they think, and as Elena was saying, do they have ideas? Because certainly in terms of where things are changing, I think it's quite an empowering environment where you can really try to hook somebody into the overall organizational value by asking them their ideas, because this is the rule book's been torn up. This is where we can create new ways of working. We have had to. We can create new approaches. We can adopt new technologies, new structures, and I think that culture is constantly moving, and it's supported by dialogue and communication.
Thanks there, Helen. I just want to talk about something kind of, I guess, similar to that, where you talk about kind of those kind of new structures and the way that we do things. And I'm just going to ask Luke, because Luke, you're in a practice environment, which is a practice environment that I know very well, having trained in practice. And I guess looking at your role now, where you're kind of mentoring your kind of trainees or mentoring people within your firm, how has that differed, or has that changed for you kind of over the last 2 years? And do you see it kind of going back to normal, or do you see there being a subsequent change as we start to go back to normality?
I think the biggest thing that we've lost, I touched on when we were speaking to, is that as we, over the last 18 months moved to working from home solely initially, we lost that office-based support. So you miss the learning and the development that you perhaps don't realise you're getting just by hearing conversations that are going on in the office. Being able to pop your head across the screen and ask somebody for support. So I think that's what we've lost, and it is very difficult to replace that in a remote environment. So I think in terms of as we return to a flexible working arrangement, perhaps that I perceive there will be a need for trainees to be more office based than perhaps more qualified members of staff, so that they still get that level of learning and support that that trainees have previously had. But I think it's more important now than ever to implement mentors, to implement a proper mentoring system so that the trainees have a direct line in, and it's not necessarily a manager or a partner that's a direct mentor. It could be somebody just 18 months further on in the training, so that it's somebody that's been there and done it, just recently. They're able to, converse with them remotely, or whatever method people might choose, WhatsApp messages and that type of thing. They're able to actually give real life support. I was here just 12 months ago. I had a similar problem, and this is how we can approach it and support you. So I think that implementation of mentors or buddies or whatever you want to call it will be key to making sure that the support and development needs of trainees are met.
Luke, I think what you were saying about the home and the training for people, I think is so important, because I know myself when I was training, if I was sat in a pod with a partner and whoever else, and I saw that they would just come off a call and they had 2 minutes, I'd ask a question. I'd feel a lot more reluctant to book a call in their diary, would feel more formal to say, am I doing this right? Is this right? What do you do about this? And I think it's those informal, like you say, that just happen quite organically, are really valuable, and just very difficult to make work in a remote environment.
Yeah, I would agree. Some of the team members I worked with, they would keep themselves live on WhatsApp throughout the whole day. So they'd be working on something, the team would see an email come into the HR system. Oh my gosh, who's going to deal with that one? And so they'd talk about it. How would they manage that? And it was really good for the new starters.
Excellent, yeah, thank you.
I think as a partner as well, sort of with the remote working, I very much, we take responsibility for all of the staff, as partners, because as business owners, they are, staff are our biggest asset. And you mentioned about that WhatsApp being always online. I think it's more important than ever, as leaders, that when your Teams goes or when your phone goes with a colleague, that you have to answer it, because it could be that point, Helen, like you just mentioned, where you needed a bit of ad hoc support or query. And I think if you can show that you're there remotely, it's very important to gain in the trust and development.
I think we've lost those. It's been mentioned. We've lost those. Those just casual sort of interactions that you might have making a coffee or as you're passing somebody in the office. And, I think that's something that, this WhatsApp group, or we have an internal Slack system where it's like shouting to somebody across the office, or just having a quick question rather than having to make it more formal. But how else can we I suppose, what other things can we do to make up for that lack of casual interaction, and thinking about sort of retention? How do we ensure that our team members and individuals are aware of, opportunities, progression? How do we overcome those physical boundaries that we've now got in terms of leading? Ask anybody. I'm happy for anybody to answer that one.
One thing that strikes me, and it might be slightly tangential, but it picks up on what a few people have said, is maybe an opportunity is, often if it's physical, meetings are in a physical space, and therefore you're invited in or you're not. Maybe there's an opportunity to involve staff more broadly in meetings that they wouldn't normally go to. So maybe things that might be perceived to be a more senior decision, or maybe say in the audit world, you might have some part of the team doing the planning meeting and then the juniors come in to do the execution. But maybe there's an opportunity to bring people into those higher level discussions, which are often more interesting, maybe about the direction of the organisation, about what's happening, how you're approaching a job, so that people can hear more and see what those roles involve, rather than just waiting till they're at that level that they're brought into that conversation. So maybe you can invite people along and have things in a more open way, so that people see opportunities rather than just being told about them.
I agree, and you are then empowering all employees to be involved and to stand up and have their say. And then they feel valued, that my say it means something. I'm contributing to something, a company that I believe in, a company that has a corporate social responsibility policy, a company that does charity work, a company that does this, and they will think of things and ideas that you wouldn't even think about, because you sometimes are focused on certain things as a manager and leader.
And I think as things, we're in such a dynamic environment at the moment, I think that new input, those new ideas, this might be the time where we should be changing direction. It's not just about teaching people how we do things, it's maybe we should be doing them differently, and bringing in those ideas is good business sense, because it drives us to make better decisions as an organisation.
Yeah, I like that. The involving those more junior team members. You know, ultimately, IT is not my strength. I will admit it. I'm old and getting older, and my IT skills are not great. And yet other people have those skills, those digital skills. Well, let them do it. Let them use it. Let them come in and share the ideas and the innovations. You know, sometimes you have to sort of accept that's not the best thing for you to spend your time doing, because you're not the right person for that role. And I think these words that we've seen, you know, empowering people, getting them involved in those higher level conversations is absolutely fundamental, because you know, just because you are seen as the leader, the partner, the manager, it doesn't mean that you have to do everything. You're not always the right person for the job. And I think identifying that as a manager is really important, and being able to give that ownership and that responsibility to somebody else, I think can be a really strong message.
Yes, so as a manager leader, being honest with yourself is really key. You know, if you have a weakness, say that I have this weakness, and your team should know about it, and put your hand up to failures, and then work as a team together.
I love what you said there, Helen, about showing people and telling people, because it reminds me of a meeting I had with a client where the partner of a firm was saying, oh, we've lost the member of staff, that they've gone to another firm, and they said it's a real shame, because you know, she was absolutely brilliant, she breezed through her exams, she was absolutely amazing in the workplace. We had really high hopes of her becoming a partner within the next 5 to 10 years, and I just asked the question, did you ever tell her that? It's like, oh no, we don't tell people that kind of thing. We let them figure it out, and eventually we surprise them. And it's kind of, well, if people can't see a pathway and you're not telling them that there is something there, how are they going to know? Which is, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that tell people this is the pathway, and you know, this is if you want this. Yeah, and then another thing that I think, Elaine, you mentioned, I know it was mentioned, I think by Kay earlier, about values. There's again, I'm going to keep talking ill of my clients here at this rate. A client of mine who works in business intelligence, and if you look at what they do, you know that they shine a light on businesses. That they bring, you know, they make data usable for anyone. They're an amazing company that do really fantastic things. If you go to their finance team and ask them, what do you do? They'll say, oh, we got our management accounts out by working day 3. And is that really the aim of the vision of that? Is that something you can get on board with? I know many of us as accountants might think, oh, brilliant, that sounds great. But you know, it doesn't really tell me that's what the business does. So you know, I like that talk about, you know, what the vision or the idea or the aim behind the company is.
Okay, I think we might have time for sort of one more point to discuss. So I guess one of the things that's really come out of this session today is the recognition of people's well-being, people's health, people's mental health as a result of things that have happened. And I'd be interested just on the thoughts from Luke and Elena and Helen in terms of, you know, how do we manage that with our teams? How do we ensure that we're not overloading them unnecessarily? How do we ensure that, you know, we're still getting the results, we're still pushing them to improve themselves, but we're not overloading them to that point that's just too far? Has anybody got any thoughts or comments on that?
I think I'll go quickly.
Okay.
I think maybe it's about ensuring your team are resilient. Obviously you have to be resilient as well, but if they're excelling under pressure, you have to give them the tools to be able to excel under that pressure and excel, so they're not reacting in a way with stress to that pressure. They know how to manage it with tools, with whatever support that the company has learning how to ground yourself. So some people could go to the office and get really stressed, and they're, it's like, I've got to get in the office now, and it's actually giving me anxiety. What tools can they use to stop that stress? They've got to go in because they're worried about the report. Breathing exercises, baby breathing. I mean, it's so simple. We learn how to breathe as babies. I used to be a personal trainer, and one of the first things I used to teach clients was teaching them how to breathe properly again, giving them the tools to be resilient and excel under pressure in this kind of environment when you do need to push employees sometimes.
Thank you.
I think for me, it's important, to have regular conversations with people working for you. Ultimately, you have to be in a position to understand the potential stress or pressures that they're under to be able to help them. So if you're not regularly conversing with them, not regularly checking in, then it becomes very difficult, to help them, as you mentioned, Elena there. So I think that for me is key, is creating that environment where you are regularly engaged with members of the team working for you. And I think David mentioned something about leading by example. If somebody's delivered a piece of work for you under a tight deadline that created a significant amount of pressure, reward them. Tell them that they've done well. Tell them that assignment's gone to plan. And you know what? It's Friday afternoon. Go and pick your kids up from school, for example. Where you might not have been able to, and actually maybe lead by example. And if your work's done, go and do the same. And I think those little bits of reward and recognition, help to as an employer to show that empathy, to show you understand that the pressures that they've been under, understand that you've done a good job for me. So take a little bit of time for yourself. And I think that's important.
Thank you. And Helen, to finish?
Yeah, definitely. I was just going to say, Luke, I think that's a really important point. It sounds so silly, but I really notice it. And it's remarkable how many people don't remember to say thank you. And it is so basic, but it really has an impact when you don't. I would say from this point of view, maybe remembering to be focused on measuring outcome rather than input. In professional services, we've got a bit of a guilty showing up culture. Have you got your suit jacket on the back of the chair? Who's there the latest? That's just gone. And I think, measuring what work people are doing and being grateful for that rather than feeling the need to check in on how they're doing that. I guess as well, tying back to what Kay said earlier, making sure the work that they're doing feels meaningful and it adds value. And also that the good stuff is distributed equitably. Just because somebody's really good and they deliver, let's not push them too hard and give them some of the good stuff as well as the harder stuff.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate your input. Some really interesting stuff there. And just a point that, having had discussions with all of the panel prior to today, remember one of the things that I was chatting to Elena about last week was, one of the greatest things you can give as a reward, if you like, as a leader or a manager, is actually just your time. Because, as much as, yes, it costs you as the manager, but, ultimately, yes, you'll probably catch up later anyway. That time that you can give to your staff to listen, to ask the deeper question of how are you really, that kind of thing is invaluable, and somebody will really appreciate the fact that you put plenty of time in the diary to speak to them, or that you took that time out to go grab a coffee and you were able to just step away from what you were doing to spend time with them. And that was something that, for me, conversation that I've had over the last sort of week or so really sort of resonated with me, and I've made a conscious effort to block days out in my diary where I don't put any other work in, and it will just be to speak to people. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
So does anybody have any final thoughts before we let everybody get back to their busy afternoons? Anybody have anything final to say?
I've just added the Stress Management Society website on the link on the discussion.
Perfect. Thanks, Elena. That's on the chat.
Yeah, there's a good tools on there as well.
Perfect. Thank you. And we will distribute the recording and any resources out to everybody. Some people had to log off early, and I know some people couldn't attend. And I'll just finish by popping up people disappearing, and I can't work quickly enough because, as I said, my IT skills just aren't good enough, and now I can't find where to share the screen and I'm looking in the wrong place. There we go. And I was just going to remind you, for anybody that wanted to grab a free place on our first L&M session in October, to just drop myself or Dave an email. But thank you so much. Thank you very much to all of the panel today, and thank you for those of you that have joined us from wherever you are in the country, and we will see you for the next one. Thank you so much.